In this series of how-to videos, we're focusing on specific uses of Codeit. These short videos will walk you through the features and steps you can use in Codeit to accomplish a certain type of task. Today we're looking at brand coding. Brand coding is a type of coding where the verbatims are typically very short and repetitive. The classic example of this is a brand awareness question in a survey. Respondents will tend to give very short responses, usually consisting of a single word. Also, the same responses will tend to come up repeatedly. For example, in this data, Coca-Cola is mentioned lots of times by various respondents. Brand coding is often characterized by recurring typos, so in this example we can see lots of misspellings of Coca-Cola. Sometimes respondents will list several brands in one go. For example, looking at this data, Question 1 is intended to capture spontaneous first mentions, but as we see here, there are a couple of people who have listed more than one brand name. So during this demo, I'll show you how we can deal with all of these characteristics quickly and easily using Codeit. So let's get started. To begin with, I'm just going to show you the most basic way we could code this data using Codeit. I'll show you some more sophisticated techniques later, but for now I just want to make sure we've covered some core concepts. I have my data loaded here in block coding mode, and you can see the verbatims are listed in the verbatim column. My code frame is on the left and of course is empty to begin with, so my first job is to add some codes to the code frame. There are two ways to do this. One way is to simply click Add Items and type the labels for the codes I want to add to the code frame. To start with, I'm going to add Coca-Cola to the code frame, like this. The first thing to notice after the changes are saved is that all the verbatims that exactly match Coca-Cola are now auto-coded by Codeit, which is a great performance boost. Notice that there are some misspelled variations of Coca-Cola, and also a few Cokes that have not been auto-coded, but we'll get to those shortly. For now, it's important to understand that just adding Coca-Cola to the code frame allowed Codeit to perform a simple text match between the verbatim and the code frame label. Where an exact match is found, the AI generates a suggestion with a 100% confidence score and can therefore automatically apply the suggestion. Note that the matching here will work regardless of the case used in the verbatim, so an uppercase or lowercase Coca-Cola will still match the code frame label. You can also add items to the code frame by right-clicking on the verbatim and clicking Add to Code Frame. Here, I'm going to add Fanta to the code frame, and when I save the changes, you can see that all instances of Fanta are automatically coded as expected. So let's return to the misspelling variations of Coca-Cola. What happens if I code the first one? The item I'm working on has the code applied to it, but none of the other misspelled items beneath it are changed. How about if I code a few more? Again, none of the other items are altered. But once you code 5 or more examples, then Codeit will look for further instances of this text and automatically code them. Codeit requires this threshold of 5 examples as a way of being sure that we're not basing the auto-coding on a slip-up or an occasional miscoded example. The threshold of 5 is just the Codeit default setting. You can change this threshold in the admin section of Codeit under text match frequency setting. And now I can repeat this step for the other misspellings of Coca-Cola. Now that all the variations of Coca-Cola are coded, let's turn our attention to the mentions of Coke. Suppose we're interested in coding all items that contain the word Coke, regardless of where it appears in the verbatim. For example, we might want to catch Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Cherry Coke, and so on. One way of doing this would be to filter on the word Coke, and then manually apply code 1 to these items. This would teach the AI how to code these specific examples, but it wouldn't help us if another variant of Coke came up at some point later. The AI would have no examples of this specific variant, so it wouldn't automatically know how to code it as Coke. So in situations where there's a clear rule, and in this case the rule is, does the verbatim contain the word Coke? We can define a text matching rule against the items in the code frame. So by right-clicking on the relevant code frame item, I can create a text match rule so the verbatims are coded as 1 if they contain the word Coke. Once the rule is saved, I can right click on the item and apply the rule, and it will automatically apply code 1 to all verbatims that contain the word Coke. And so here we can see that Diet Coke, Cherry Coke and Coke Zero have all been coded as Coca-Cola. And lastly, what do we do about items like this, where the respondent has mentioned a number of brands all in one go? In this example, we can see a clue showing how we might handle this kind of thing. Notice that we defined a rule to match the word Coke anywhere within the verbatim, which means, conveniently, that this verbatim has been correctly coded as Coca-Cola. So by adding rules like this to the code frame, we can match multiple items within the verbatim. For example, if I add Fanta as a rule to this code, and then apply the rules, you can see that the brand Fanta has also been coded against this item. That is one way of handling this kind of issue, but we'd prefer not to have to manually add text matching rules for every brand in the code frame. So Codeit has a nice feature that we can use instead. To use this, I click on the settings and switch on Allow Partial Coding. Now, if I add Pepsi to the code frame, we can see that the Pepsi items are automatically coded. But also, because we have enabled partial coding, any items that contain Pepsi are also coded without us having to create a text matching rule. So at this point, our coding is done, which is great. But the really useful thing is that all the rules and intelligence is now baked into our code frame. This means that this intelligence can be automatically applied by Codeit to future waves of data. This gives coders a huge productivity increase and gets the job done in a fraction of the time. What's more, we can reuse this code frame on other projects, and all the intelligence will come with it, giving us the same productivity increases on other projects too. At the beginning of this video, I started out by manually adding items to the code frame, and that's a perfectly valid thing to do. But before we end, I'd like to show you an alternative method of generating the initial code frame that would jumpstart the whole coding process. So here, I'm starting from scratch again, and my empty code frame appears on the left. Rather than add codes manually, I'm going to use the Auto Generate Code Frame feature. But before I do, I'm going to re-enable the partial text matching again in the settings, because I want to use this in combination with the code frame generation. So when I click the Auto Generate Code Frame button, a dialog appears that allows me to decide how many times a piece of text must appear before we can make a code out of it. I'm going to set this to 2. We can also choose a maximum code frame length, but as this dataset is very small, the default of 500 will be fine. When I click the Generate button, you'll see that a code frame is automatically generated, and when I save the code frame, Codeit will automatically perform the same text matching we saw earlier and code all of the items in one go. The difference with this approach is that our code frame now contains the misspelled items too. So the job of the coder at this point is simply to merge the unwanted misspelled items into the corresponding correct item in the code frame. Once this is done, saving the code frame reassigns the misspelled codes into the parent code. And it's important to bear in mind that Codeit remembers how these misspelled items should be coded, just as it did earlier when we coded them manually. So again, when Codeit is presented with these misspelled variants again, then it can apply this learning and automatically code these items in the future. So that's it, brand coding done in a matter of seconds, painlessly, cleanly and intelligently. If you're interested in learning more about anything you've seen in this video, then do get in touch through our website.